achieved in concrete terms in its presidency? In optics, of course, we have been seeing a lot of videos of people being taken around the country. I think they had over 200 plus meetings already. But in concrete terms, what has India achieved in the last 1 year that this G20, we can say, India has left an impact on? Professor Nalapat, do you want to speak about it, please?
Well, I'd like to point out that this year has been a very outstanding year for the G20. The G20 actually was, not really considered to be such a major forum for international discussions. It was more like a talking shop. Under Prime Minister Modi, it was converted into an action-oriented platform. And the consequence has been that a large number of papers have come out from the different countries in the G20. A large number of ideas have been generated. Several meetings have taken place. And two things have happened. One, what India is has spread across the four corners of the world, courtesy the G20 members. Secondly, what the world is. The G20 is, after all, the top 20 economies in the world. It's a very significant part of the world. What the world is has come to every corner of India. So in that sense, this concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we are one family, we are one interdependent family, has really, gone home into every part of India, because unlike in the past, when these meetings would take place in a handful of locations, over and over again, this time they have been spread across the entire country. So I think that's a huge difference, and I would like to credit Prime Minister Modi with making that difference.
Ambassador Bambawale, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. What I think is that taking over the presidency or the chairmanship of the G20, which are the 20 largest economies in the world, is a sort of coming of age for India. Also, the very fact that the G20 was not just restricted to the capital city of India, but was taken to 40, 50 other cities, has raised consciousness amongst the ordinary people of India about what the G20 is and how important it is for India to take over the chairmanship. And I want to end with just one other point. I'm visiting Delhi after a gap of 12 months, and I can tell you that when I drove from the airport last night into the city, I was dazzled by the kind of infrastructure that there is in Delhi, and that has also been replicated in other cities where G20 meetings were held. So it's a win-win-win for everyone in India.
So in terms of policy, now will India be able to impact policy globally through this G20 meeting?
Look, I think that India has already left an imprint on the G20 through its chairmanship during this year. And the way it has left its imprint is that India has been the voice after consultation of the global south, which is of the developing nations of the world. You know that the G20 is mainly represented by the developed world, but the few countries from the developing world like India, we have been able to make our voice heard in this committee of 20 nations.
Yes. Professor Nalapat, since Ambassador Bambawale mentioned about the global south, now here I have a question. Now India aspires to be the leader of the global south. Now how we also saw the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, where he urged the Prime Minister that you are the leader of the global south, you should be taking our voice to the developed nations, because our problems no one talks about. But at the same time, when we are talking about India becoming the leader of the global south, I think there is a major problem there, but there is a China in the room, because it is China that says that we are the leader of the global south. So how do you think that India can counter that problem? Especially when we look at least in terms of the allocation that China makes Say, for example, in Africa, it's almost 7 to 8 times China's offer for line of credit, compared to India's. How do you think India can counter that problem?
Well, I'd like to say the problem is basically countering itself, in the sense that a lot of these Chinese projects are given at fairly high rates of interest. Many of them are financially unsustainable and they're developmentally unsound. And very importantly, most of the work is allocated to Chinese nationals who are brought in and not to the locals. Having said that, I'd like to point out that so far as the global is concerned, it's very important. Now you saw Chandrayaan example, Chandrayaan mission. It was something that, about for so many years, it was derided for having space ambitions. I think, frankly, the last of those individuals who may be deriding India will now have kept quiet after the immense success of Chandrayaan. India has shown that a country that belongs to the global south can rank right there at the top in terms of technology. In that sense, it's been a role model. And even in the BRICS summit, when you had this BRICS plus, one or two countries, I think Kazakhstan, for example, mentioned about Chandrayaan and complimented India for that. So that is a very, very important point, that India has shown that a low per capita income need not mean a low level of achievement. Very importantly, that the global south needs to be fully represented, because the global south has potential, and if it is fully represented, if its voice is heard, that potential can be better used and everybody will benefit. And lastly, may I point out regarding Africa, which is the country that is requesting that the African Union should be part of the G20. You have the European Union, why not the African Union? Which country is that? It's India. So I would like to say that, and most importantly, Joyita, whether geographically or in terms of GDP, China is not a member of the global south. India is. So from that point of view, I'd like to say, I don't think we have a China problem. I think China has a problem and other countries have a problem when they believe that China is the solution.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, please.
And I want to answer it by giving you a parallel. On your birthday, Joyita, suppose Professor Nalapat and I were to both give you a gift, a birthday gift. Professor Nalapat gives you something which is very, very expensive, but I give you something which may be less expensive, but very thoughtful and something which you really require. You're going to prize my gift more than Professor Nalapat's. I'm sorry, Monu, to take this sort of example, but that is, whom I mean when I talk about, this sort of parable. So I think the more thoughtful and more sort of appropriate gift carries a lot more weight than something which is much more expensive. So
would you say the projects that India is undertaking in the global south are more people-oriented, and that is the reason while China is going for more infrastructural projects?
No.
Is that what you're talking about?
What I'm talking about is that the projects that India is doing is after consultation with those countries concerned, and therefore it is the projects that those countries require.
Right.
It's not something that we're sort of fostering on them or foisting on them.
Okay. Now, Professor Nalapat, here I have a question about, at a time when there is economic recession in major parts of the world. We know the reasons why. We will come to that later. Now, when India, thank God that we have been a shining example when it comes to the way we have handled the dual blow of COVID and Ukraine war. Do you think India as G20 presidency has been able to highlight its experience of tackling this problem, in fact, not just as an example to the global south, even as an example to, I would say, the G7 countries, the leaders, the first world countries, so-called first world, the developed nations?
Joyita, just let me add a little bit to what Gautam has said, and that is in the Pacific Islands. Health is a very important problem there. For many problems, they have to travel to Australia or they have to travel to even further locations for help. What India has done is to try and have send kits and send equipment so that you can set up health centers in the Pacific Islands. This is an example of what Gautam was saying. And that is that you are looking at the need of the people there. Whereas all these infrastructure projects, essentially, that is the need of the Chinese industry to employ its people and to make money out of it. Eventually, this is unlike in India, where a large amount of money is given as straightforward aid. The Chinese give money in terms of loans. So that is an example, the Pacific Islands of health, where it counts. Education, the digitalization, for example. India is an example of the rapidity of the digital space being expanded. Tremendous expansion has taken place over the last 5 or 6 years, and that experience is being shared. It's being looked at by other countries in the global south, and it's being shared. Now, so far as Ukraine is concerned, I think India has taken a very wise decision, essentially, to continue to buy resources from Russia. It's been my view that cutting off resources from Russia, which is half of Europe, half of Asia, is actually a terrible self-goal for the European Union. But they have done that, but we have not done that, and we have been purchasing Russian resources, oil in particular, for example, in a very large measure. So from that point of view, as far as Ukraine is concerned, we are very, very clear. We want the fighting to stop. We want the bloodshed to end. And the sooner that happens, the better. We can discuss the issues, various issues after that. But first, the killing, the bloodshed, the suffering, the losses must stop. That has been what India is saying. And I can tell you more and more people are coming to believe that India, which made this stand clear at the very beginning of this unfortunate conflict, is in the right, and that this conflict needs to stop as soon as possible.
Ambassador Bambawale, we know it has been tough for India to stand up to the West and follow its policy on G20. Now, follow its policy about, on Ukraine, about kind of non-aligned kind of, if I can use that word. Now, but at the same time, because of the Western world's insistence on highlighting the Ukraine war, making it a central kind of a policy for G20, how tough has it been for India to stand up to the kind of pressure that has come from the West?
No, there definitely has been pressure from the West. But I think what India has done is it has looked at its own national interests and made decisions based on what is good for India, not what is good for the West or for any other country in the West. And if you judge on that basis, India has held its ground. So I think India has done excellently well in holding its ground and in protecting its own national interest, its own interests where this Ukraine-Russia conflict is concerned.
Yeah. Now, Professor Nalapat, you see, even though we say that India has been able to hold its ground, now there is a problem in terms of the absence of an outcome document. I mean, we have seen it in, I think, the finance minister's G20 meeting that happened. We saw it in the same foreign ministers meeting also that happened. We could not come out with an outcome document because of opposition from China and Russia about inserting a paragraph on, against aggression, even without mentioning Ukraine. In fact, there was a statement from our government at one point of time that, a similar paragraph was inserted in the Bali outcome document that happened in G20 last year. But China and Russia kind of signed on to it. But this time, China and Russia have been refusing to sign. So what is going on here? Is China trying to use Russia to embarrass India, to try and sabotage the G20 meeting? Is that what is going on?
Look, Joyita, I don't believe that the absence of a document is going to take away the reality that G20 has arrived on the global stage as a major platform during the presidency of India. Don't forget, 2023 was the worst possible year to take over the presidency. It's a world that is now completely fractured. That is fractured on, you're seeing, as you correctly said, Russians and the Chinese together, and you're seeing the West, the G7 on one side, Russia and China on one side, and India, a friend of the West, at the same time, a friend of Russia. And so you're seeing a very, very difficult fault line. And I'd like to say that so far, I must say, it's been amazing to watch, and I've been to some of these G20 meetings, it's amazing to watch. In the same room, you have the Americans, you have the Russians, and you have these other members of the G20, and well, they have their geopolitical issues with each other, but it is possible on one platform for them to work, to be together. And of course, the Indian side produces a large number of documents, a large number of suggestions. Others are producing a large number of suggestions. These are not just going to be, burnt as firewood. They are going to be used as policy in several countries and not only in the G20. So the fact is that, look, China will try and ensure to its satisfaction that India does not succeed in G20. The fact is, India has already succeeded in raising the G20 to a new level, in creating so many platforms and so many ideas that are now being disseminated across.
Yeah, okay.
I'll just add one.
Showcasing India to the world and the world to India. Please.
Yeah.
I'll just add one sentence to what was said by Professor Nalapat, which is that it would be, the lack of an agreed outcome document as reflecting on India's chairmanship or presidency would be the wrong takeaway. It will actually reflect on the state of the world today, which is divided on this Ukraine-Russia crisis, and not so much on India's chairing of the G20 this year.
Okay, one last question, because I'm told time is almost up. Now, one last question to both of you. How do you see the G20 summit that is going to take place panning out? I mean, do you see, number one, Zelensky coming? Do you see Xi Jinping and Putin coming? And how tough will it be if we have to see Biden and Putin in the same room? Is the possibility there? Which way is the summit headed? Professor Nalapat, please.
Well, I would like to say that, President Biden has already confirmed that he is coming. As far as President Putin is concerned, I think, that he made a very correct decision in keeping away from South Africa, a very correct decision, and quite possibly the same decision will be taken in the India meeting as well. It was, in my view, a very statesman-like gesture on the part of President Putin, and a gesture like that, at the G20 summit will resonate very well with the huge number of Indians who are friendly with Russia and who know Russia to be a friend. So that is my view as to what could be an outcome. But having said that, I'd like to point out that, these are, the question of who comes or who does not come, I'm not going to get into that, because that is something the future will say, except to say that one thing is very, very clear, and that is, this is going to be an important summit. Why? Because it is a summit across both divides of this fault line. What Ambassador Bambawale was correctly referring to is huge widening chasm between two groups of countries. I mean, what some of us have called Cold War 2.0. And in this widening chasm, you have this meeting of almost all these countries taking place physically, some possibly virtually, and I think that is an achievement in itself. It's an achievement in itself, frankly, that so far, none of these sessions has created the kind of, if I may say so, implosion that was sought after by those who don't have India's interest at heart. So I think the very fact that in a year where explosions are taking place all around us, the G20 platform has not imploded, has in fact strengthened, has in fact benefited humanity. I think that's a huge plus.
Thank you. And will you please repeat?
Yeah, just one sentence, which is that, years from now, when you look back on the G20 summit in India and the presidency of India of the G20, you will look at it as a point in the upward rise of India towards great power status.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Bambawale. Thank you, Professor Nalapat, for joining online. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.